I woke up to a sharp beeping that cut through the darkness, the kind of sound that pulls you out of sleep before your mind can catch up and ask what is happening. For a moment, I stayed completely still, staring at the faint outline of the ceiling as the automatic blinds in my waterfront condo at Harborline Towers slowly lifted. A thin strip of dawn light slid across the floor. The alarm continued, steady and demanding. It was the building's security alert, the one that only activated when someone tried to force entry or demanded access without permission. I pushed myself upright and felt the familiar tension in my lower back, a reminder of the day everything in my life shifted. My condo on the 12th floor had always been my safe place, the one space where I could breathe without feeling the world press against my chest. But at 5 in the morning, even a sanctuary can feel exposed. My phone started vibrating on the nightstand. I turned toward it and answered, assuming it might be a system error or a routine drill. Instead, I heard Trent from security, and his voice was unsteady in a way I had never heard before. He told me my sister Lydia and her husband were downstairs in the lobby. He said they had arrived with a moving truck and were insisting they owned my condo. According to them, he explained, I needed to come down immediately and leave because they were taking possession that day. For a few seconds, I listened in silence. There was something surreal about hearing my life discussed as if it were already over. I told him it was fine and that he should let them sign in. Then I wheeled myself toward the kitchen and reached for the mug I had left on the counter the night before. The coffee was cold, but the bitterness grounded me. I took a slow sip and focused on my breathing. That moment carried the same steadiness I used to feel before a high-pressure briefing back when I worked for the Bureau, before the accident that took mobility from my legs and forced me into a different version of myself. Outside the windows, the harbor looked silver and calm, boats rocking gently as if nothing important was happening. I often wonder what people are doing when they listen to stories like mine. Maybe you are driving to work, folding laundry, or sitting with your own cup of coffee as the sun comes up. That morning, I was in my wheelchair near the open blinds, feeling the cold from the glass and trying to understand how my own sister could arrive with a moving truck before sunrise. If you want to share where you are listening from, you can leave a comment. I like knowing how these moments connect people who have never met. The lobby cameras streamed live to my phone. I tapped in and watched from above as the sliding doors opened and Lydia walked in, her arms crossed tight against her chest. She looked smaller than I remembered, almost folded inward. Beside her stood Bronson, her husband, calm and controlled, holding a folder that he kept tapping against his leg. Behind them, two men in navy shirts waited near a bright white moving truck. They looked half awake and uncertain, clearly unsure whether they were involved in something legitimate or something complicated, but present because they were being paid. Trent approached them from the security desk. Even without audio, I could tell he was explaining procedure. Ownership does not disappear overnight. Possession is not transferred because someone shows up with a truck. The movers kept glancing at the folder in Bronson's hand as if it were a permit they were waiting on. Lydia rubbed her forehead and kept looking toward the elevators as if expecting me to appear at any moment. They stood beneath the warm glow of the lobby chandelier, while outside the sky shifted from dark gray to pale blue. Watching them on the screen, I felt calm. Not detached, not numb, just steady. This was the moment everything had been moving toward. The subtle lies. The quiet comments about my memory. Neighbors suddenly asking whether I was sleeping well or forgetting things. I thought of May at the cafe downstairs a few days earlier. The concern on her face when she asked if I was okay and whether it was true that I sometimes woke up shouting from nightmares. I remembered Lydia's shaky voice when she suggested helping me manage my finances so I would not overwhelm myself. At the time, those moments felt odd but harmless. Now they aligned perfectly, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I had not realized I was assembling. The camera angle shifted, catching Bronson as he turned toward Lydia and gently touched her elbow, a gesture that might have looked supportive to anyone else. I knew better. That touch was calculated. Control is often hidden behind softness. I studied his expression. His jaw was tense. His eyes kept moving toward the elevators. Whatever he had planned, this was meant to be the final step. He believed he had outplayed me. He assumed the trail was complete and that I would fold under pressure. I took another sip of cold coffee and let the bitterness sit. There was something fitting about watching them stand in my building, waiting to take the home that had become my lifeline. I had rebuilt myself in that condo. I had learned how to live with pain, how to breathe when anxiety tightened my chest. I had cried there when memories of the accident became too heavy. I had laughed on that balcony when Lydia brought me dinner during the early months of my recovery. That space had held me together until I could do it myself. And yet they believed a single surprise morning could erase all of it. I set the cup down and rolled closer to the window. The sun was fully rising now, turning the harbor gold. Boats nudged gently against their ropes. I brushed a strand of hair from my cheek and let the moment settle. This was not a crisis. It was the opening scene of a plan I had already completed. They were stepping directly into it, unaware. Every detail was in place, every document secured, every piece of evidence ready. Trent looked up toward the camera, perhaps aware I was watching, his posture asking whether he should delay them, call the police, or escort them out. None of that was necessary. I opened the microphone to his station and spoke clearly. I told him to let them in and allow them to sign the visitor log. I wanted everything recorded, every step documented. When I ended the connection, the condo felt unusually quiet. The alarm had stopped. The blinds were fully raised. The soft clinking of halyards against masts drifted up from the marina. I sat with my hands resting on the wheels of my chair, breathing evenly. They did not know what I had done the day before, and they were about to find out. Before that morning in the lobby, before the moving truck, the cold coffee, and the calm that surprised even me, there was another version of me. One I sometimes still look for when I wake in the dark. Back in 2019, I was not a woman in a wheelchair living in a waterfront condo in San Diego. I was running on adrenaline and caffeine, chasing leads for the Bureau, working in counterintelligence, trying to stop threats before they became headlines. My days were measured in briefings, reports, and coded conversations I could not share at family dinners. I had a body that responded without hesitation and a mind convinced I could outrun almost anything. When people imagine accidents, they picture a single dramatic moment. In reality, the event that changed everything began quietly, with a strange pattern in financial records, a familiar name appearing where it should not have, a lead that seemed insignificant, and then refused to disappear. We followed it into a late-night drive, into a surveillance operation that should have been simple. It was not. I remember fragments, wet pavement, headlights cutting across the median, the sudden impact of another vehicle fleeing an unrelated crime and colliding with ours. The world shifted. Metal shrieked, glass fell like cold stars. Then there was nothing. When I woke in the hospital, medication softened everything. I learned that the people who loved me had been told I might not survive. Then they were told I would, but that my legs would never carry me the same way again. My spine had absorbed the damage. There would be rehabilitation, wheelchairs, and limits I had never imagined. The Bureau supported me as best it could. There were medals, handshakes, and speeches about service. Eventually, there was a settlement, a figure calculated to represent the value of lost mobility and a changed future. I was told I would receive $2 million in insurance compensation. After that, donations arrived from people who had read about the accident and wanted to help. It was generous and overwhelming. I had never thought about money on that scale. I grew up simply. We did not have much, but my parents kept the lights on and food in the fridge. They gave us love when there was little else. Then in 2010, a drunk driver crossed a line he never should have. One moment my parents were there, and the next they were gone. No long illnesses, no slow goodbyes, just a call, a crash, and silence. I was 17 when I became the adult in the house. Lydia was 11, wide-eyed and full of sudden laughter. The state offered options, guardianships, foster care, all framed in careful language. I looked at my sister and knew I would not let strangers raise her. So I did what I always do. I made a plan. I worked. I studied. I paid bills while others went to school dances. Some nights I sat at the kitchen table doing homework after putting Lydia to bed, feeling the weight of it all. Then I wiped my face and kept going. In many ways, becoming an agent later felt like a continuation of that role. I had learned how to carry responsibility quietly, how to observe, how to read the boundaries people set and the ones they tried to cross. The training was demanding, but it was structured. When I joined counterintelligence, I believed I had turned early responsibility into purpose. The accident took more than my spine. It took that certainty. After months of rehab, after learning transfers and navigating public spaces where strangers avoided eye contact, I had to choose again. I could not stay where every street reminded me of what I had lost. I needed a place that felt open. San Diego stayed with me for one reason: the ocean. I remembered a short trip there as a teenager with my parents. The salt in the air, the way the sun slipped into the water. When the final paperwork and payments arrived, I spread them out on the table and thought about where a woman like me could begin again. The answer kept drawing me back to that stretch of coastline. I used part of the settlement to purchase a modest one-bedroom condo at Harborline Towers, overlooking the marina. By the standards of some residents in the building, it was not impressive, but to me, it felt grand. The building was designed with ramps and elevators, and the security staff learned my name quickly. The first night I slept there, I was propped up on pillows with the sliding door open just enough to hear the water. I cried quietly into my blanket, not purely from sadness. It was grief and gratitude intertwined. Lydia visited often during those early months. She would arrive with takeout containers, small plants, and stories from her job as an assistant to an event planner. She had always been good at describing people, and she would talk about demanding brides and corporate clients who changed their minds every few minutes. We would sit on the balcony, my chair angled toward the horizon, her legs folded beneath her on the outdoor sofa. Sometimes she would fall silent, glance at my chair, then look away. That moment stung, but it was honest. We had both lost something in the accident. The sister she remembered, the one who could run after her or lift her off the ground, was gone. In her place was someone who still teased her about her taste in television, but now needed help reaching certain shelves. After she left at night, the condo often felt too large. The ocean sounds soothed me until they didn't. Sleep came slowly, and when it arrived, it brought images I couldn't control. Headlights rushing forward, tires spinning, the brief weightlessness before impact. I would wake suddenly, heart racing, breath uneven, hands gripping the sheets as if a steering wheel were still there. Those episodes became routine. Some nights I heard myself make a low sound, not quite a cry, not quite silence, the noise of someone caught between past and present. If Lydia was staying over, she might knock gently in the morning and ask if I had slept well. I would brush it off, say I was fine, just restless, blaming the medication for vivid dreams. It was easier than seeing worry take hold in her expression. That became the rhythm of my life. Therapy twice a week, where a calm professional asked me to talk about the crash and about being someone who had always cared for others and now had to accept help. Physical therapy sessions focused on strengthening the muscles I still controlled. Trips to the cafe downstairs, where May would slide my coffee across the counter and tell me about her grandchildren while I tried not to react when a car backfired outside. On the surface, it probably looked like resilience, a woman rebuilding a stable life in a bright city with a scenic view. Underneath, there were fractures. I felt them when a siren passed too close. I felt them when someone brushed past my chair without apologizing. I felt them when I saw families walking along the harbor, parents carrying sleepy children who were safe. There were days I missed my parents with an ache that felt physical. Lydia stayed close through most of it. She called often, sent messages, shared photos of cakes from weddings she worked on. She talked about long hours and difficult clients, but there was a lightness in her voice. She began mentioning a man she had met through work, someone intelligent and funny who understood contracts better than anyone she knew. She said he listened to her and made her feel secure, like she didn't have to worry about details because he always had a plan. At the time, it sounded reassuring. After everything we had lived through, I wanted her to have someone dependable. I didn't yet realize that the same traits that seemed comforting to her would register very differently to me. There is irony in how my trauma later became a tool. The nights I woke abruptly, the nightmares, the moments when my voice shook as I told Lydia I was okay. Those private struggles would eventually be reframed into a narrative about someone incapable of managing her own life. The accident didn't stop affecting me when the car stopped moving. Its impact carried forward, shaping choices and relationships years later. But in those quieter months, I was simply recovering, trying to build a routine from damaged pieces. I didn't know how closely my life was being observed, or that my sister's new boyfriend was already collecting details. I didn't know he had read the article about the injured agent who received a large settlement, or that he had imagined Harborline Towers before we ever met. I was tired, hopeful, and trying to believe the worst was over. Bronson Reeves entered our lives the following spring, the kind San Diego is known for, warm with a gentle breeze off the water. Lydia came to my condo one afternoon, glowing in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She wore a pale blue dress that moved as she walked, speaking so quickly I had to tell her to slow down. She said she'd met someone at a corporate event, a paralegal who had helped resolve a last-minute contract issue. She described him as calm and capable, someone who made everything feel manageable. As she talked, her expression softened, and I felt myself relax slightly. She deserved something good. He visited about a week later. Lydia invited him for coffee so I could meet him. He arrived exactly on time, carrying a small box of pastries, setting it on the counter with a polite smile. He thanked me for having him, complimented the condo, and asked how long I had lived there. His voice was steady and practiced, not artificial, just experienced at putting people at ease. Under different circumstances, I might have thought him genuinely considerate. He sat across from me at the dining table, turning his mug as Lydia talked about her week. Occasionally, he added a comment, supportive or lightly teasing. He asked about my rehab, whether the building suited my needs, about the view from the balcony. The questions were ordinary, the kind people asked to be polite. Even then, I noticed how his eyes moved around the condo, not with curiosity or admiration, but with assessment, as if he were noting more than furniture. I dismissed the thought. Visitors look around. I told myself my instincts were oversensitive, shaped by years in the bureau where vigilance kept me alive. I had been trying to stop seeing danger everywhere, a habit useful in one life and exhausting in another. As summer settled in, Bronson became part of our routine. He picked Lydia up from the lobby after long shifts or met her at the cafe downstairs. I often saw them from the balcony, his hand resting lightly at her back, her posture relaxed beside him. He appeared attentive without being controlling, charming without excess. Even May commented on him, saying he seemed well put together and always tipped generously. Those details spread quickly in a building like ours. One morning I went downstairs for coffee. My chair moved smoothly across the lobby floor, the smell of roasted beans greeting me before the elevator fully opened. May handed me my usual order and then asked if I had been sleeping well. The question caught me off guard. She said Lydia had mentioned I sometimes made noises at night, that I might still be having nightmares. She asked if I ever woke disoriented or if someone checked on me. The words tightened something in my throat. The concern felt rehearsed, not spontaneous. I told her I was fine, just adjusting to medication. She nodded gently, unsure whether to push. As I waited for the elevator, a neighbor passed by, a man who usually kept to himself. He slowed slightly and asked if everything was okay in my unit, mentioning the lock. That struck me as odd. I was meticulous about security. Trauma makes habits rigid. I never left my door unsecured. I said so, and he smiled awkwardly before walking away. The ride to the 12th floor felt longer than usual. His phrasing replayed in my mind. It sounded repeated, not personal. When I reached my hallway, something felt different. Not physically, but in atmosphere, as if quiet conversations had passed through. In buildings like ours, people notice patterns, changes, deliveries. If someone wanted to shape a story about my stability, this was the right environment. I went inside and closed the door, standing still as the quiet returned. The condo was familiar, safe, but unease had slipped in. I tried to recall if I'd said anything that could be misunderstood. Had Lydia shared details of my nights? Maybe. But the timing felt intentional. Two conversations in one morning, both framed as concern, both carrying implication. I stepped onto the balcony and looked down at the marina. Sunlight shimmered on the water. A couple walked along the pier, calm and unhurried. From above, everything looked orderly. Inside my mind, an alert had activated. I thought back to Bronson's first visit, the way he glanced at my medical equipment, how he lingered over the framed article about my accident, how he asked carefully whether I ever felt overwhelmed living alone. Individually, none of it mattered. Together, it formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Bronson understood legal structures, guardianship, power of attorney, language that framed oversight as care. If he had been quietly planting ideas through Lydia, neighbors, casual conversations, then my unease wasn't accidental. I rolled back inside and sat by the counter, holding the warm mug May had given me. My heart wasn't racing, but it was alert. Something was unfolding around me, something deliberate. The concerned comments were not random. They were practice lines in a story being shaped about me. I knew then I needed to pay attention, to listen closely to what Bronson said and how he said it, to hear not just my sister's words, but what sat beneath them, to recognize the shape forming before it hardened. The accident had taken my legs, not my instincts. The next morning, I entered my living room with a focus I hadn't felt in years. My condo had always been a refuge. Now I evaluated it differently. Entryways, hallways, access points. I didn't want paranoia, but I understood manipulation. It begins quietly. People like Bronson don't rush, they probe. They frame concern as kindness. If unchallenged, their confidence grows until damage is done. I returned to my training, step by step. I installed cameras. Nothing obvious or extreme, just quality devices that blended in. One facing the front door, one in the foyer where packages arrived, one near the bedroom entrance placed high enough to escape notice. Each recorded continuously and sent footage to a secure cloud server. Bronson would never know about. The final camera faced the internal corridor outside my unit. I had once thought those open-air hallways felt safe. Now I watched them like a surveillance zone, tracking movement, learning patterns. I tested each device carefully, leaving the frame, returning, stepping out to confirm motion detection. When I finally reviewed the feeds on my tablet, I felt something steady return. I was not helpless. I wasn't unbalanced. I had tools. I had a plan. And despite what Bronson believed, my mind was clear. It took only 3 days for the first confirmation. I had left the building for a physical therapy appointment and returned earlier than expected after the schedule changed. When I opened the live feed from my hallway camera, I saw Bronson standing outside my condo door. The footage showed him glancing to both sides, then pulling something metallic from his pocket. He moved in controlled silence, sliding a key into the lock, opening the door just wide enough to enter and closing it behind him. My hands stayed steady on the tablet as I watched him move through my home. He walked with an unsettling certainty, like someone who had already mapped the space and knew exactly where things were. He checked the drawers near the living room, paused by my bookshelf, then headed toward the bedroom hallway. He opened the small filing cabinet beside my desk and went through the documents carefully, returning some, shifting others slightly. He was searching for paperwork, ownership records, settlement documents, anything that could be shaped into the story he was constructing. I watched him close the drawer, smooth the surface with his fingertips, and leave without taking a single page. That told me he wasn't finished. He was surveying. That evening, Lydia came over for dinner, unaware anything was wrong. She talked about work, a demanding wedding client making last-minute decor changes, and a coworker who kept volunteering her for extra tasks. When she mentioned that Bronson had borrowed her spare key earlier that afternoon to check on a delivery at his place, something clicked. He had used her trust without hesitation. After she left, I pulled an old contact notebook from my desk drawer. I hadn't opened it in years. Near the back were names I once called regularly, names that still felt familiar under my fingers. One of them was Dorian Hale. Dorian and I had worked together in Bureau counterintelligence before my injury. He had a rare skill with details, especially written ones. He read handwriting the way a scientist reads data, tracking patterns and inconsistencies with precision. After I left the Bureau, he moved into private consulting for law firms and insurance investigators. We exchanged the occasional holiday message, nothing more. I called him anyway. When he answered, his voice carried the same dry humor and sharp focus I remembered. He asked how I was doing. I told him I needed a favor. He said he owed me more than one. I emailed him several documents Lydia had brought over a few days earlier. She had said Bronson found them through a colleague and that they would help organize my finances in case anything ever happened to me. At the time, the language had made me uneasy. It was vague, heavy with preparatory clauses around signatures. Now, I saw them for what they were, early steps toward a guardianship claim or transfer of authority. Dorian called back that night. He asked if I was sitting down. I told him the chair was permanent, so yes. He said the signatures weren't mine. They were close enough to pass a casual glance, but not exact. The angle of certain letters was wrong. The pressure along the baseline didn't match my dominant hand. Whoever forged them understood legal structure, but lacked refined technique. He said it was typical of paralegals who learned forgery by exposure, not training. My stomach went cold. I asked whether the documents would stand up in court. He said absolutely not. Any handwriting expert would flag them as fabricated. He asked if I wanted a formal report prepared. I told him not yet. I needed to see the full scope of what Bronson was assembling. After the call, I sat in the low light of my living room, listening to the city hum outside. Harborline Towers had always felt safe to me, a place of polite nods and casual waves. Now the air inside my unit felt heavier. I thought back to the early days after my accident, to the news coverage when the settlement was finalized. Articles about my service, the mission that left me injured, the community support. Photos of me standing before flags, another in my wheelchair receiving recognition. Anyone with time and interest could find those stories. Anyone with ambition could follow the trail. A financially stable woman, physically vulnerable, with one younger sister and no other close family. From the wrong perspective, my life could look like an opening. I hadn't wanted to believe Bronson targeted us. But watching the pieces align, there was no alternative explanation. I turned off the main lights and let the condo fall into shadow, the balcony glow faintly illuminating the room. I took a slow breath and held it. Bronson wasn't just influencing Lydia. He was shaping a narrative about me. He was testing access, forging signatures, seeding concern, building groundwork. And I knew that if I didn't act quickly and carefully, he would take everything I had left. The hardest part was knowing Lydia still believed he loved her. She didn't know she had been chosen long before she ever smiled at him. I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them with the calm of someone who had rebuilt a life once before. I had the cameras. I had the footage. I had handwriting analysis. The picture was clear. Now I had to decide how to use it and how far I was willing to go to stop a man who believed he already owned my future. The answer came sooner than expected. 2 days after my call with Dorian, I was home on a slow Tuesday afternoon. The harbor was covered in a soft marine layer that washed everything in silver. My therapy session had been canceled, so I was answering emails at my desk. A light blanket covered my legs, my chair angled so I could see both the water and the front door. There was a knock, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. A pattern. Bronson followed patterns. I checked the peephole. He stood alone, wearing a polo and jeans, holding a slim black folder and what looked like a small toolkit. His expression was carefully concerned. I considered not answering, pretending I was out. But avoidance turns into surrender, and I wasn't willing to give him that. I opened the door enough to meet his eyes. He said Lydia had called him. She mentioned flickering hallway lights the week before, and since he knew a bit about electrical systems and had a friend in maintenance, he thought he'd check. I had never mentioned flickering lights. I told him the condo was fine and that building management handled those issues. He insisted gently, saying he didn't want me worrying about safety after everything I'd been through. People like Bronson relied on that hesitation, on politeness. I stepped back and let him in, calm on the outside, focused inside. One of the cameras was positioned high in the living room, aimed at the entry and my desk. He was perfectly in frame. He checked the recessed lights briefly, touched the switch, glanced up. Then he drifted toward my desk, asking if my laptop ever had power issues. Before I could respond, he was already there, adjusting the power strip. His eyes kept sliding toward the filing cabinet he had searched before. I stayed still and let him continue. He talked about power surges, asked if he could move a few things. I nodded. He shifted the desk chair, rested a hand on the cabinet, then opened the top drawer casually. He didn't know I had reorganized it. Labeled folders, copies of settlement papers, official ID, tax records. He flipped through them, lingering on anything tied to accounts or property. I sat a few feet away, hands folded, expression neutral. Inside, my thoughts moved with precision. He asked if I'd ever considered simplifying paperwork, said that with my medical history, it might help to structure things in case anything happened. The phrase landed heavily. I asked what he meant. He spoke smoothly about trusts, shared decision-making, protection. He suggested that giving him and Lydia authority could help if my health declined. He didn't mention my mind, but the implication was clear. After he left, I replayed the footage. The excuse, the cabinet, the scan, the speech. It was all there. Later that week, Lydia came for dinner. We ate with the balcony door open, evening air drifting in. She seemed distracted. Halfway through, she said she wanted to ask something and didn't want me to take it wrong. She said she and Bronson had been talking about my future. She worried about my stress, the bills, the condo, the settlement. She said I deserved rest. Then she repeated his words about shared responsibility, about legal options, about letting them help manage things. The words were hers, but the framing was his. I asked gently if she thought I couldn't manage my own life. She rushed to reassure me, saying that wasn't it at all, that she knew I was capable and organized. She said she did not want me to feel alone in any of it. Then she added something that cut more deeply than she likely understood. She said that sometimes I seemed a little forgetful, especially after a rough night, and that maybe having help would be a relief. It is a strange experience hearing your own vulnerability used as supporting evidence, even when it comes wrapped in concern. I looked at her across the table, the young woman I had raised since she was 11, the person whose scraped knees I had cleaned and whose tears I had dried when missing mom and dad left her unable to speak. She truly believed she was protecting me. She trusted Bronson so completely that his ideas felt like her own. In that moment, I understood how deeply he had embedded himself in her life. It was not enough for him to use my trauma. He was also using her love for me, shaping it, redirecting it, and turning it back on me as justification. I told her I appreciated her concern and said I would think about it. That seemed to ease her, and she relaxed for the rest of the evening, talking again about work and a new client who wanted a beach wedding with no sense of budget. But the damage was already done. The seed had been planted, and I knew exactly where it came from. A few days later, a piece of mail arrived that made everything unmistakably clear. It was a thick envelope addressed not to me personally, but to something called Dalla Family Trust, LLC. The return address belonged to a financial services firm in the city that specialized in managing property and assets for families who, according to their glossy brochures, required a sophisticated approach to wealth protection. I held the envelope and felt its weight in a way that had nothing to do with paper. The company name, the use of my last name without permission, the implication that an entity already existed to hold my assets. I had authorized nothing like this. I opened it carefully and laid the contents on the counter. Inside was a welcome packet thanking Dalla Family Trust LLC for choosing their firm. It referenced upcoming consultations about real estate and investment portfolios, along with language about consolidating holdings to improve management efficiency. Nowhere did my full name appear as an individual, only as part of the trust. I could almost picture Bronson somewhere with a laptop, filling out online forms using enough information about me to appear legitimate to anyone who did not look closely. Names, addresses, fragments of my financial situation pulled from old articles. He was no longer guessing. He had moved from observation to construction. I gathered the documents and placed them in a new folder, one I marked clearly in my mind as preparation for conflict. He had revealed his plan. He was not merely trying to influence some of my decisions. He was preparing to move my home and my settlement into a container, a controlled legal shell bearing my family name, designed to make theft appear like management. Standing in my kitchen as the harbor light faded and the envelope lay open, I felt a familiar cold settle in my chest. It was not fear and not quite anger, but a focused, clinical resolve. He had made his move. Now it was my turn. Those words stayed with me long after I left her office, repeating through the drive back to Harbor Line Towers. The late afternoon sun still glinted over the marina, catching the tops of the masts and scattering gold across the water. I felt the warmth through the window as I rolled into my condo, but beneath it was something tighter, more braced. The feeling reminded me of moments before high-risk interviews, when everything depended on staying calm and letting facts surface on their own. That morning, I had met with Maribel Stone, one of the sharpest probate attorneys in San Diego. She listened without interruption as I laid out the timeline, the forged signatures, the LLC envelope, the camera footage, and the pattern of manipulation spreading through my life. When I finished, she leaned back, thoughtful, like someone adjusting puzzle pieces that already fit. She confirmed what I had suspected. Bronson was circling incompetency claims. He was setting up a shell company to absorb my assets, and he had already attempted forgery. She explained that people like him rarely moved without expecting to hold an advantage. The only way to stop someone like that was to remove the advantage before he reached it, which is exactly what we did. We built a special needs asset protection trust designed for people with long-term disabilities who needed their financial assets shielded from exploitation. Within that structure, my condo no longer appeared in my personal name. My accounts were transferred under the trust registration. Every deed and document was refiled, sealed by the San Diego County Probate Court, stamped and protected. I retained full authority, but no one could attempt guardianship without running into immediate legal resistance. Bronson believed he was one step away from what was mine. In reality, he was walking straight into a wall I had built in a single afternoon. When the clerk handed me the stamped order, the impact hit harder than I expected. My condo, the settlement I had rebuilt my life with, the savings I guarded carefully, were no longer exposed to anyone's scheme, especially not his. I rolled through the condo, my fingers brushing the back of the sofa. Faint laughter drifted up from the pool deck, along with splashing water and the distant hum of a boat engine. Everything looked ordinary, yet beneath the surface, everything had shifted. I stepped onto the balcony and let the ocean air wash over me. The scent of salt pulled old memories forward. Dad driving us down the coast on that long-ago summer trip. Mom leaning out the window to catch the breeze. Lydia in the back seat, eating orange slices and getting juice on her chin. I could almost hear Dad calling directions, as if the road itself needed his voice. Grief comes in layers. It never disappears, but sometimes it offers a quiet reminder. Standing there, I felt both absence and presence at once, and it reinforced my certainty that someone like Bronson could not be allowed near anything tied to our name. Inside, my phone buzzed. A message from Lydia. She said she might stop by later if I was free, just to talk. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with sadness. She had no idea what she was caught in, no idea that the man she trusted had been examining my life like a spreadsheet to reorganize. I replied that she was welcome. Then I opened my laptop and reviewed the camera feeds again, not because I needed more proof, but because watching the precision of his intrusions reminded me that his decision had been made long before any of us noticed. The footage showed him entering with her spare key, pausing at the filing cabinet, opening drawers with confidence that did not belong to someone checking electrical issues. His movements were deliberate, his focus exact. He assumed no one would question him. As evening settled, Lydia arrived, letting herself in with the soft knock she had used since childhood. She looked tired, her shoulders slightly raised, as if carrying a weight she could not name. Her eyes flicked to my chair, then to the documents on the table. She hesitated. I asked how she was, and she sat on the edge of the sofa, twisting her fingers the way she always did when troubled. She mentioned that Bronson seemed stressed, busy, preoccupied. He had been talking more about planning, about responsibility, about making sure everything was handled properly if something ever happened. The phrase surfaced again, rehearsed and familiar. I asked gently if she ever felt he wanted control rather than help. She looked confused and shook her head. She said he cared, that he wanted what was best for us. The ache in my chest deepened. She believed it. I changed the subject before her worry grew, and we talked about her week, about a last-minute wedding near La Jolla, the decor chaos, the catering problem narrowly avoided, the bride who cried over color palettes. She made me laugh, and for a moment things felt normal. When she left, I watched from the balcony as she crossed toward the parking garage. She paused and looked up at my unit on the 12th floor. I could not read her expression from that distance, but the tilt of her head made my heart twist. I had protected her since she was 11. I had stepped into the role Mom and Dad left without hesitation. Losing her trust, even briefly, felt like losing part of myself. I turned back inside and rolled to the kitchen island where the trust documents lay neatly stacked. I rested my palm on them. These pages were not just legal protection. They were a boundary I never expected to need against someone who married into my family. I closed the folder and slid it into the drawer by my desk. You then sat quietly listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the building settling for the night. Harbor lights flickered across the ceiling. Maribel had been right. Everything was in place. The court had sealed the trust. The transfers were complete. The structure was solid. All that remained was to wait for the moment Bronson pushed too far, the moment he believed he had already won, the moment he stepped into a trap he did not know existed. I spent the rest of the night preparing for what came next. Maribel had assured me the trust was airtight, that no one could penetrate it without leaving a trail obvious to even a first-year law student. But she also reminded me that people like Bronson rarely stop at the first obstacle. When one door closes, they try another. When one angle fails, they shift. What we needed was an action so clear that nothing he said later could soften or excuse it, which meant giving him the chance to act. The next morning, I began my performance. I called a rideshare in full view of the lobby camera and wheeled myself out with an overnight bag. I told the concierge I would be out of town visiting an old friend. I left cheerful notes in the resident app thanking neighbors for watering plants as spring approached. Every detail was designed to feel natural. Then I had the driver circle the block twice and drop me at the rear service entrance. I slipped back in through the delivery hallway and rode the freight elevator up. No resident saw me. Only night staff would know I was inside. The condo felt oddly theatrical after that. I closed the blinds, dimmed the lights, and moved quietly into the bedroom, the only room he had no reason to enter and the only place I could remain unseen. I set my laptop on the bed, opened the security feeds, and let all 6 camera windows arrange across the screen. It felt like sitting in an operations van again. The glow, the hum of electronics, the world reduced to moving frames. The first day passed without incident. I watched maintenance workers vacuum the hall, delivery drivers leave packages, Lydia text once to ask how my trip was going. I replied that I had arrived safely. The second day was the same, uneventful, but patience had once been part of my training, and I still knew how to use it. On the third day, under bright harbor sunlight and the city's steady rhythm, everything changed. At 2:14 p.m., the hallway camera registered motion. The alert turned green. The feed showed Bronson walking toward my door with a familiarity that tightened my stomach. He glanced down the corridor, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out the stolen key, slid it into the lock, and pushed the door open with his shoulder. He stepped inside without hesitation and let the door close behind him. It hit me in a quiet wave. If I had truly been gone, this moment would have been the first official step toward losing everything I owned. The thought tightened my chest, but I forced myself to stay quiet and observe. He moved through the condo with ease, no longer pretending. He went straight to the dining table and picked up a stack of my mail, flipping through it casually and discarding anything he did not want. Then, he walked into the living room and stopped in front of the large windows, standing there as if already imagining the space as his. He took out his phone and began taking pictures. Wide shots of the room, close shots of the built-in shelving, angled shots of the kitchen counters and appliances. He sent them off immediately. I could see the messages appear across the top of his screen in the camera feed. 3 images at a time, no captions, just photos. Then he spoke aloud to himself. The camera microphone captured every word. He said she would not see a single penny of this. He said the condo belonged to him. He said this was the easiest transfer he had ever handled and that it would all look perfectly legal by the time he finished. I stayed still in the bedroom, listening to his voice through the speakers. My hands did not shake. My breathing stayed steady. There was no anger in that moment, only a cold recognition of the type of person who could say things like that openly. He believed it completely. He walked over to my desk and opened the same drawer he had searched before, scanning the folders again and muttering that he just needed the right papers signed to complete the transition. He said once those signatures were secured, the trust would be locked and Lydia would control everything through him. He added that no court would bother listening to a disabled woman if there were doubts about her competency. That was when my laptop buzzed with an incoming call. I recognized the caller ID immediately. Lydia. I waited a moment before answering. Too much silence would worry her. I kept my voice light when I said hello. She sounded rushed and slightly out of breath. She asked where I was and whether I had a minute. Then she said Bronson had mentioned something important before leaving their apartment, something about needing me to sign a few documents for my protection. She repeated the phrase exactly the way he did. For my protection. She explained that he told her my condo and finances needed coverage, that my trust had been misfiled, and that things could become complicated if I did not sign soon. I closed my eyes briefly and let her words settle. She had no idea what she was saying. No idea she was standing exactly where he wanted her. I asked her calmly whether she believed I could no longer make decisions, whether she thought I was losing track of things, whether she believed I could no longer manage my own life. She whispered no, but her voice carried uncertainty, as if someone had been teaching her to doubt herself. She said Bronson had shown her examples of people who needed help managing their affairs. He had told her trauma could make people forgetful. He had suggested gently that maybe I needed guidance. I let her talk. It hurt to hear how thoroughly he had shaped her thinking, but I needed her words recorded. The call system on my laptop captured everything. In the living room, Bronson continued searching. He opened the cabinet under the television, checked the drawers by the sink, pulled open the entryway closet. He moved with purpose, even humming softly, as if nothing could possibly go wrong. I told Lydia that I loved her. That was not strategy. It was simply true. Then I asked her not to sign anything, no matter how much Bronson pushed. She agreed, weakly. I could hear the conflict in her voice, loyalty pulling her in opposite directions. After the call ended, I watched Bronson step out onto the balcony. He opened the door and lifted his phone again, recording a slow panoramic video of the harbor. He commented on the listing price. He said someone from his office would drop off the transfer paperwork. By the weekend, he said, once it was finished, I could leave quietly before things became public. For a few seconds, I could not move. The arrogance, combined with his precise confidence, made my skin prickle. The living room camera captured everything. His voice, his claims of ownership, his admissions of forgery and transfer, his photos for valuation, his timeline. For the first time since this began, something shifted inside me. The trap was not just set, it had closed. Bronson stayed nearly 40 minutes, providing more evidence than any judge could ask for. When he finally left, he did not bother to straighten anything he disturbed. As soon as the door shut, I released a breath I had not realized I was holding. The condo felt different again. Not violated, but reclaimed. I rolled out of the bedroom slowly, letting the familiar rooms open around me. The living room was quiet. The harbor light was softening. Everything looked the same, yet nothing was. I stopped at my desk and rested my hand on the drawer he had opened earlier. My reflection hovered faintly in the dark television screen. He thought he had won. He thought he was one signature away from controlling my life. He had no idea the documents he needed were already sealed beyond his reach. No idea every word he spoke had been recorded. No idea the next step would not belong to him. I locked the front door myself and listened to the click echo through the condo. Small, but certain. It was almost time for the endgame. The night passed in the slow, fractured way only sleepless nights do. I drifted in short stretches, never fully resting. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Bronson in my living room again, heard him say I would not see a single penny, that the condo was his. When I slept, it came in fragments. Dad driving along the coast, Mom laughing under the faded lights of a gas station. Lydia as a child holding my arm on her first day back at school after we lost them. I woke more than once gripping the edge of the mattress, the sound of the ocean and the city blending into a low hum. By the time the security alarm sounded at 5 in the morning, I was already half awake. The first thing I saw was not the ceiling or the blinds, but the grainy, steady image from the lobby camera on my tablet beside the bed. I had left it open intentionally. A quiet window into the entrance of Harbor Line Towers. When the system detected unusual activity at the gate, the feed shifted. Headlights slid across the pavement. A moving truck eased into the circular drive, large and white against the pale blue dawn. Its engine rumbled with the deep vibration heavy vehicles produce, felt more than heard. A dark sedan followed and stopped near the loading zone. The lobby lights were still on their night setting, slightly dim and warm. The glass doors opened and Trent stepped away from the security desk, glancing toward the front windows. His posture was tight, shoulders raised, the look of someone who sensed trouble but did not yet know its scale. He had spoken to me moments earlier, his voice unsteady as he explained that Lydia and Bronson were downstairs with movers, insisting they owned my unit. I had told him to document everything. Now, I watched from 12 floors above and years of preparation behind me. 2 movers climbed out of the truck, rubbing sleep from their eyes and pulling jackets tighter against the morning chill. They opened the rear door, revealing the empty space inside, waiting to be filled with someone else's life. The sight sent a strange shiver through me. For them, this was just another job, an address on a clipboard. The sedan doors opened almost in sync. Bronson stepped out, his stride smooth and assured. He wore a dark coat over a pressed shirt, an outfit designed to look respectable anywhere. In his hand was the same thick folder he had carried before. It had become his prop and his shield. Lydia followed from the passenger side. Her shoulders were hunched inside a pale sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. From the camera angle, I could not see her face clearly, but her body language said enough. She lingered half a step behind him, arms wrapped around herself as if cold in more ways than one. Bronson reached back and placed a hand on her shoulder. To anyone else, it might have looked reassuring. To me, it looked like control. They entered the building together. Trent met them just inside the doors. There was no audio, but I could imagine the exchange. Identification. Explanation. Bronson's calm, authoritative tone. Trent's hesitation caught between procedure and instinct. Bronson opened the folder and spread out documents with bold seals and clean formatting, pointing line by line as if demonstrating proof. He gestured upward toward the elevators. The movers waited, shifting their weight, watching for approval. I saw Trent open the visitor log and write their names. Bronson Reeves, Lydia Reeves. The reason was likely simple, something neutral. Move-in, property transfer. Whatever he wrote would matter later. Every line of Trent's handwriting added to a record that would protect me. I adjusted slightly on the bed, pulling the blanket higher over my legs. My heart was beating faster now, not from panic, but from focus. The lobby feed shifted as they moved toward the elevators. The movers carried folded dollies and stacks of flattened boxes. Bronson walked ahead, speaking over his shoulder. Lydia followed, arms close, eyes down. The elevator doors closed and the view cut. I switched to the service corridor feed on the 12th floor. The doors opened again and the group stepped into the quiet hallway leading toward my condo. Most residents were still asleep. No one witnessed the procession but me, watching from a screen. Bronson led, folder under his arm. One mover pushed an empty dolly, its wheels squeaking softly on the polished floor. The silence felt heavy, broken only by footsteps and the distant rumble of the truck below. When they reached my door, fury mixed with a grim satisfaction. That door had marked safety for so long. Now it was the line he believed he was crossing to claim victory. Trent stood a few steps back, cautious. Bronson reached for the stolen key, then stopped himself, remembering that today he was supposed to be legitimate. Instead, he lifted the folder and tapped the top page, looking at Trent with practiced confidence. I could see his mouth form familiar phrases. Property transfer, deed, owner of record. He displayed the papers like a trick, daring anyone to challenge them. The movers exchanged glances. One shrugged, clearly focused on the job. Bronson turned back to the door inserted the key in full view of the guard and the camera, and opened it as if entering his own home. I switched to the interior feed facing the entryway. The door opened and Bronson stepped in with a level of satisfaction that made me feel ill. The movers followed, scanning the room, already dividing furniture in their minds. Lydia hesitated at the threshold. For a long moment, she did not enter. She gripped her purse strap and looked around the familiar space. I recognized it in her posture, the memories tied to every corner. Nights on the couch, dinners at that table, celebrating her first real promotion with cheap champagne and takeout in this room. Bronson touched her elbow and guided her inside, treating her like a guest rather than family. He began giving instructions, brisk and controlled, pointing toward the bedroom and living room, signaling the large items first. One mover headed down the hallway. The other began measuring the sofa with his eyes. Hidden in my bedroom, I kept my focus on the screen. The tension in my shoulders tightened, but my breathing stayed steady. This was the moment everything had been built for. Either the protections we put in place would meet his arrogance, or they would not. There was nothing left to change. The mover at the bedroom door called something out. Bronson waved impatiently without looking. That single gesture told me exactly how he saw my space. I was no longer a person to him. I was an obstacle he believed he had already cleared. As the movers opened the living room fully and discussed how to move the furniture, the air in the condo seemed to shift. Outside, the harbor glowed pale gold. The sky lightened from blue to peach. The city was waking up. People were making coffee, turning on morning news, stepping into showers, completely unaware of what was unfolding on the 12th floor of a building by the water. I remained in the shadows of my bedroom, the laptop glowing softly beside me on the bed, watching as strangers began what they believed was the dismantling of the life I had built. In reality, every step they took moved us closer to the moment when Bronson would learn that the version of events he had created would not be the one that lasted. The first indication that things were shifting was subtle. A brief flicker appeared in the corner of my tablet where the exterior camera feed updated. A dark vehicle pulled in behind the moving truck. Smaller, quieter. The clear outline of a San Diego Police Department patrol car. Its headlights swept across the back of the truck, then dimmed as the engine shut off. Through the camera, I could almost sense Trent's relief. He stood near the lobby entrance with his arms folded tight, watching the movers head toward the elevators. When the patrol car doors opened and two officers stepped out, he moved toward the glass doors as if a tight pressure in his chest had finally released. One officer was a woman in her 40s, compact and steady, dark hair pulled back, her expression neutral but alert. The other was younger, tall, scanning the area with the cautious attention of someone still learning how fast situations can change. The older officer spoke briefly with Trent. He gestured upward, toward the elevators, the truck, and the visitor log on his desk. This was exactly what Medell and I had planned. Nothing dramatic, nothing that revealed too much too early. Just a quiet report from building management that something felt off, an unannounced move. A resident believed to be away but not officially gone. A key that had not gone through concierge approval. Enough concerns to justify a welfare check. On my screen, I watched the officers ride up in the elevator with Trent. The movers continued stacking boxes, unaware that anything had shifted. Inside my condo, Bronson stood in the living room explaining to one mover how he wanted the larger furniture positioned in the truck to avoid damage. Lydia stood near the dining table, fingers pressed to her lips, deliberately not looking at the sofa they were preparing to move. The service corridor camera showed the elevator doors opening on my floor. The older officer stepped out first, Trent just behind her. The younger officer adjusted his belt, his hand resting near his radio. The older officer took in the hallway quickly, her attention settling on my open door and the unusual sight beyond it, movers hovering over someone else's belongings before sunrise. She approached with controlled steps and stopped just outside my doorway. From my bedroom, hidden but watching, I saw her raise a hand in a polite but firm gesture and ask what was going on. Her voice carried enough for the living room microphone to capture it. Bronson turned immediately, the practiced smile already in place, the folder of deeds tucked under his arm like a universal pass. He greeted her as if this were a minor inconvenience. He said they were completing a routine move-in. He said he had the deed and transfer documents ready if she needed confirmation. He spoke with such confidence that, without context, even I might have believed him. The officer asked to see the paperwork and stepped just inside the living room, careful not to go further until she understood the claim. Bronson opened the folder with a small flourish and presented the same stack of documents he had shown Trent earlier, pages dense with legal language and borrowed authority. She reviewed them carefully, not rushing, not allowing his commentary to distract her. The camera caught her eyes pausing on the notary seal, her brow tightening slightly as she traced the registration number. She flipped to the deed that supposedly transferred ownership of my condo. She asked where the notary was registered. Bronson answered smoothly, mentioning an out-of-county contact who handled things quickly for his firm. He insisted everything had been done properly and said the seller had signed willingly, gesturing vaguely down the hallway as if I might appear on cue. The officer did not react. She asked whether he understood that notaries handling California real estate transactions must be properly registered and that their commission numbers were easily verifiable. She noted that the number on the seal did not match any active notary on record. The statement landed heavily. I saw color fade slightly from his face before he recovered. She added that property records showed the unit was held in a recently filed and sealed Special Needs Asset Protection Trust. She asked how his documents addressed that. That was Marty Bell's work, ensuring law enforcement had enough context if they were ever called to my address. For the first time, Bronson hesitated. He said there must be an error. He claimed the trust was outdated. He said the woman who lived here did not fully understand what she had signed and needed guidance, that he and his wife were stepping in to help. He repeated the same language he had used with Lydia. Not competent, under stress, needing protection. That was when I moved. I rolled my chair out of the bedroom and into the hallway. The camera captured the immediate shift in everyone's posture. The movers froze, hands still on my furniture. Lydia turned sharply, her hair slipping loose, her expression caught between hope and fear. Bronson's jaw tightened before he forced his composure. The officer looked at me and asked if I was the resident. I told her I was the legal owner and that my name was on the trust documents she had referenced. My voice was steady. Years of training and months of preparation had led to this moment. She asked if I had consented to the move. I said clearly that I had not, that I had never sold my condo, never authorized a transfer to Dalla Family Trust, LLC, to Bronson or to anyone else, and that I had not hired the movers or agreed to leave my home. The younger officer stepped closer to the movers and instructed them to stop touching anything until the situation was clarified. One man pulled his hands away from the sofa as if it burned. The other rolled the dolly back slightly. I turned to the older officer and told her I had evidence. I explained that Bronson had entered my unit without permission using a stolen key, that I had video of him searching my drawers, audio of him stating I would never see a single penny, and that the condo would be his. I told her I had received mail for Dalla Family Trust LLC at my address, a company I had never created. A forensic specialist had examined signatures on documents Bronson attempted to use and confirmed they were forged. Marble Stone had already filed my trust with the court and could verify that any deed Bronson presented was fraudulent and conflicted with official records. I delivered each point calmly and clearly, the way critical information is meant to be conveyed. The officer listened, then asked if I had copies. I reached to the table beside my chair and handed her a prepared stack of folders, video stills with timestamps, a summary letter from Dorian on the signature analysis, the fraudulent welcome packet addressed to the LLC, the court order establishing my trust. She reviewed each item with growing focus. The room was silent except for Lydia's uneven breathing. Bronson attempted to interrupt, claiming I was confused, that trauma had affected my memory, that I had agreed to parts of the plan. He reached toward Lydia as if to anchor his story. She pulled away for the first time, looking between me, the officers, and the documents. She asked him why he had told her I was losing control, why he said I would hurt myself with poor decisions if they did not intervene. Her voice faltered with each question. He replied that he only wanted to protect me, that everything he had done was for family. The officer straightened, folders still in hand, and said that from her perspective, this appeared less like protection and more like a calculated attempt to take control of assets that were not his. She cited forgery, fraud, possible attempted grand theft, given the property value and known settlement, and abuse of a dependent adult. I have never liked that term, but in that moment I understood its purpose. It meant the law recognized how disability can make someone a target, and that exploiting it is criminal. She asked Bronson if he had anything else to present that contradicted court records or verified the notary. He had nothing. The younger officer moved behind him, close enough to change the air in the room. The movers backed toward the hallway, eyes wide. One said quietly they wanted to leave and had no idea there was a dispute. They were dismissed as witnesses and left quickly. Lydia stepped toward me, then stopped. Tears streaked her face as she asked Bronson if he had ever loved her, or if she had simply been part of the plan. She repeated what he had told her, that I did not know what I was doing, that she had to sign papers to keep me safe. He did not answer clearly. His words were lost under the sound of the officer speaking into her radio, confirming the notary issue, the trust, and the prior report filed on my behalf. She ended the call, turned back to him, and informed him he was being detained on suspicion of forgery, fraud, attempted grand theft, and abuse of a dependent adult. She read him his rights. The younger officer cuffed him, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Lydia let out a broken sob. Bronson twisted toward me, anger and fear replacing his confidence. He accused me of setting him up. I told him I had protected myself. When they let him out, the older officer told me financial crimes would follow up and that I had done the right thing. After they left, the condo fell silent, except for the distant sounds of the city waking and Lydia's quiet breathing. We stood there, the reality settling in. She finally looked at me, truly at me, and walked over slowly. She knelt beside my chair, resting her forehead on my knee, crying softly. I held her and told her she had nothing to apologize for. Manipulation feeds on vulnerability and love. We stayed like that for a while. The days after were filled with statements and confirmations. SDPD collected the footage, interviewed witnesses, verified the forged notary, and unraveled every false filing tied to Bronson. He was charged, arraigned, and restrained from contacting us. Lydia filed for divorce within 2 weeks and moved into a small place nearby. Life gradually settled. I returned to the balcony in the mornings, breathing in the harbor air, watching boats move through the channel. One morning, Lydia joined me and spoke about wanting to turn the experience into something that could help others. That afternoon, I began outlining a workshop on financial red flags and subtle manipulation. Within a month, I was speaking to small groups of women, explaining how control is often disguised as care. Strength, I learned, is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet, informed, and deliberate. Silence can be power, and truth can be the strongest form of accountability. If this story resonates with you, share what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.